Hey everybody, this is Peter. I wanted to test all of this out. Hopefully you guys are hearing me okay. We have about an hour and a half on this particular schedule, and I wanted to answer lots of questions that you guys have. There's about 50 of them that I have, and I also want to cover some general points as far as additions to the website and stuff like that. I'm not quite sure how frequent we're going to do this type of show. Hopefully we can do it fairly frequently, at least once every 2 weeks. That's my plan. And if we get more people listening, then we can do it more frequently. It also depends on how much is actually going on. First, though, I want to just thank everybody, tremendously for the Zeitgeist Day work, because it really went well. I had a great feedback from everybody, and I really appreciate everyone out there doing what they have. Not to mention the moderators and admins in the forum and on the site, making the site look good. It's really come along. So hopefully I'll have more time to interact as things move forward. One part of this radio concept is to do just that, so I can actually, talk to you guys. Eventually I'll have you guys call in. I'm not going to have any call-ins today, so if you're looking at the number for the call-in, don't worry about that. I'm not going to do that right now. I want to cover all these questions first. So first of all, I spoke with Jacques and Roxanne, and they're also very excited about this, and I'm going to have them on next time, most likely. I'm going to give Jacques the forum to give any kind of lecture that he wants and discuss any particular topic. He's got so much amazing information. You get him started on a tangent, not a tangent, but you get him on a topic, and it's just unbelievable what you can learn from him. So I want to try and maximize him as much as possible, and Roxanne. There's just a wealth of tremendous ideas and information, far beyond anything that's been communicated thus far. It's almost never ending. So that's a big thing. New website sections. I want to talk about that real fast. We have a projects page that's been thrown up, and I'm sure you guys have noticed that. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to have different projects designed for anybody that wants to interact with them. And I think we'll have a representative forum section for this as well. The first team, so to speak, that needs to be focused on is the communications team. And this is going to materialize in a few different ways. One, as a general example, I'd like to get Jacques back on Larry King. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but he was on Larry King about 4 times. Excuse me. He was on Larry King about 4 times when he was younger, and Larry King got much larger, and now he won't really pay attention to Jacques because Jacques isn't, in his mind, world renowned, and that's unfortunately how Larry King operates. But I think if we were to bombard Larry King with emails and phone calls to the station and bring up Jacques, who knows, maybe Larry, since he knows who Jacques is, might bring Jacques back on. That would be a tremendous thing for the public to be made aware of Jacques again, because he actually, Jacques is becoming much more well-known again, especially in the States, where his his lack of audience most dominantly was in the States up until recently. So the communications team will deal with things like that. We'll basically have an arsenal of people that are willing to go out and communicate to networks. Say, for example, we have someone that gives extremely negative feedback to our work. Then we'll have, negative feedback to the work to the extent where it's basically false and they're lies. Well, then we have a communications team to demand a retraction. So thousands of us go and we contact these individuals. We work as a team in order to communicate these points and to make sure things are not misrepresented, and of course to advocate everything and get this information to the mainstream as best we can. So that's one team. This is an extension of the interdisciplinary team concept. The second team would be a technological team, and this is something I want to talk about more specifically with those of you that are engineer-oriented, those that have worked in science, and even if you haven't and you just have good ideas, because it's really a matter of creativity. For instance, if you look at the world, forget about the monetary issues at hand, because unfortunately when it comes to invention, most always think with a narrow view of what's financially possible. If we move beyond that and start to look at society from the standpoint of what's just simply possible based on resources and technology, we can begin to devise creative systems that would be profound in their effect if they could be implemented. For example, I had this concept that all packaging that's ever sent to anybody, whether it's a mail order or coming, any type of packaging, obviously we get boxes and things like that. And as most of you know, packaging is very, very gratuitous. It's products that are still used, like styrofoam. They don't degrade. Packaging companies don't give any regard to the environment. Say, for example, you had a universal packaging system where all materials used in packaging were not only recyclable, but they were incorporated into the household to the extent where, just like you used to have incinerators, We used to have incinerators in apartment buildings. Well, they don't have those anymore, at least not that I'm aware of. But the chemical compounds of the packaging would be designed so the person in the household could break down the packaging immediately, and there'd be literally no waste. And it could be reduced so substantially that it's designed like that. So in an advanced society, all packaging that's something's mailed to you, for example, a box is mailed to you, you take it, you take whatever's out of it, and you take the box and you put it into this so-called incinerator, but it isn't an incinerator. It's specifically designed universally to handle the breakdown of this material. Things like this, these are things that you can think about and just come up with solutions that no one thinks about because they don't see the larger picture, things that will make our life a lot easier. For example, packaging in general, technology in general, and the construction and enclosures that we have. For example, a computer. You tend to get a computer, you replace certain components of it through time, and then eventually you throw the whole thing out because it's completely outdated, primarily due to planned obsolescence. Well, in the future, compartments of, universal compartment structures that enable all elements to be taken out and replaced and upgraded over long periods of time would be the most logical and the most resource-preserving method we could think of. So, for instance, you have a computer, and instead of having such a complex array of materials, of parts in the system, which often require you to take it somewhere, which is, of course, by design. We have all these sub-industries that exist to continue profit for servicing things. You see this in the automotive industry. This type of concept where you have a universal enclosure, and all products are designed this way, where all components are interchangeable. You take them out, you upgrade the element that needs to be upgraded, and that's it. The enclosure itself can last virtually forever, or at least a lifetime. These are the type of things that, if universally implemented, you'd see a dramatic ecological shift not to mention ultimately it's just the reduction of waste. And things like this, universal enclosures, waste reduction in homes. There's so many creative things that we can think of, and I want everyone out there to start thinking of these things without regard to money. Just think about what the possibilities are. If you're an engineer and if you're mechanically minded, that's great. Even if you're not, just use your mind. For example, people ask me, well, how can we have delivery systems in a resource-based economy when we need mailmen and things like this? Well, that's not necessarily the case. If you go to a bank, they have these pressure systems. I'm sure you've seen it. They've been around for years. There's no reason why you couldn't have an entire system where you have pressure pipes, I'm not sure of the technical, vacuum systems, where all items can be packaged accordingly to work in these systems, and they're sent out from central distribution, and they pop up in your area, if not in your home immediately, without the need for any type of delivery person whatsoever. You say that to a normal person, of course, they say, oh, that's impossible, that's just too expensive. Well, that's because that's the frame of reference they've come to understand. So that's another attribute of this projects section that we're going to start developing. One small thing about the site before I jump to the questions is third-party sites. We have a lot of third-party sites, and a lot of them doing tremendously good work. A lot of them, of course, are getting a little splintered. We have people that are doing things that are a little far beyond, I think, what's applicable or relevant, and that's a difficult thing to collar, and I'm just excited to see so much interest ultimately. But we're going to set up a third-party links page for all of those other movement sites across the world, New Zealand, and a lot of these groups are doing tremendous work, so we want to represent that, but we're also going to have to deal with the legal problems of some of these sites and some people that are doing things that are beyond the scope, or they're overriding, the Venus Project. They're presenting their own ideas to an extent where it's completely detaching. Things like this. These are problems that we will deal with, but it's not really that big of a problem. I think everybody out there just means well, and they're excited, and I think that's fantastic. So for now, I want to jump into these questions. And there's a lot of them, so hopefully I can get through all of them in the time that we have remaining. So basically, I'm going to just go straight through them. Question 1, why didn't the government try to censor the site or the movie? That's an interesting question. Well, basically, the media does a certain degree of censorship at the very onset of the release of certain things like this. But once it's in the public domain, so to speak, once it's out there on the internet, which you really can't stop anything. It's like a swimming pool out there. They can't do anything. And rather, they don't want to create martyrs. So the media can only do so much, and then they just go to character assassination and things like this. In fact, I brought this up to John Perkins. I asked him how he was able to get away with writing these books that are extremely revealing toward the corporatocracy. And he said, well, once it's out there, they really just have to leave you alone. They can't, unless, there's other caveats to that, but unless basically they don't want to create martyrs. And that's basically it. Plus, they're extremely arrogant, and they really don't believe the public has any initiative or drive. And I happen to think that the people in power really look down upon society as a whole, and by their behavior, that should be pretty obvious. Question 2. When you talk about incentive, you don't quite elaborate on the issue. The thing is, there are people that the great inventor's case is not sufficient proof that we do things because we have an interest in them. Okay, let me rephrase that question. His point is on incentive, and why will people do things just because they'll do them as opposed to getting monetary payment. The concept of incentive and monetary payment, it should be pretty obvious how conditioned that reaction is to most people. I think first of all, in the activist guide, I do point out that there's a great amount of volunteerism that happens every year across the world. People do volunteer. In fact, if you ask yourself, I think it was Margaret Mead who said something to the effect that the greatest things that we value are things that we do for ourselves and for each other that don't require money. And in this advanced system, the stress will be relieved so much by what technology has to offer, coupled with the reduction of all of the nonsense that we deal with on a daily basis today, from taxes to insurance to all the monetary creations that really create noise in the system that make our lives very difficult, debt. So the implication was such that eventually humans will transcend this need for constant reward. They will not only understand that their contributions to society are in their own best interest, not because of financial gain, but because of the fact that the only way that society can be maintained as in a peaceful balance, is for people to realize that the society as a whole has to be an integrated, happy, so to speak, working, functioning whole. If there's depravity across the world, it's just going to come back home to roost eventually. You can't have this detachment of society. So eventually, my point is, I'm not explaining this very well. My point is that the value systems will be updated to realize that the integrity of one individual is only as good as the integrity of everything else around us. And that's not philosophy, that's just legitimate. And I think that's a major step in the way people will think about things in the future. And they'll do things because they realize how important it is to do things. Not to mention that most people actually will not need to engage in the type of labor they do today. So people can have a lot of freedom, and then when they do contribute to society, it's that much more worthwhile. So I think the idea of incentive in the monetary system, unfortunately, we've been conditioned as such that we really think we need reward. We have ego, too. People believe that they are original in their creations, when in reality it's all an emergent culmination. It's all a constant evolution of information built upon information. If I was to invent something, it's really not me inventing anything. It's the whole of society inventing. I would just happen to be that particular vessel that invention came to be. And not to mention whatever I did invent, eventually it would be outdated and transcended and improved. So there's no singularity there. So I can't elaborate on that enough. I think incentive in the monetary system is a colossal distortion, and it's actually a very negative thing. I think people will do things because they want to contribute, and it will be rewarded to do so. Some people don't agree that children are born without greed, and they interpret their survival instinct incorrectly. Do you have any recommendations on some research that has been done in this area? Greed is definitely a created phenomenon. It is not natural. Naturally, we need to eat and things like this, but greed is a different level of this need to consistently and constantly acquire and want to preserve someone's integrity and the sense of ownership and things like this, apart from other psychological neuroses. Greed is, the entire system is based on greed, so how people can't see that as an environmental condition, I'm not quite sure. One thing I'd like to say very quickly on that, and I think I denote this in the presentation manual, is that before World War II, the consumption was half of what the consumption is today. We have been conditioned to buy more and more and more. Why? Because, as I point out, it's cyclical consumption. You have to have a culture that constantly wants everything. Otherwise, the whole system would fail, and this creates a tremendous distortion. So that's what I would have to say about that. And Jacques Loeb is a great example of someone who went into these concepts of instinct, for example. I think Jacques Fresco actually commented this in New York. Jacques Loeb said, instinct, what is this? Well, I want to know what the reasoning is. You can't give me a word like instinct. It doesn't mean anything, and it's true. The concept of instinct is a religious notion. It's a possession idea, and I make that point also in the presentation. So I think that's worth moving on. But anyway, Jacques Loeb, if you go to archive.org and type in Jacques Loeb, you'll find a lot of his works. They're very old now because there's very few people that have picked up where he left off, but they're very tremendous. I have a few of them. Number 3, what does Peter think of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and how they tackle the matter of religion? I like Dawkins, Harris, and Dennett. I think they all have their contributions by all means. Everyone does great in some areas and does less in other areas, and I think these guys are fantastic. I happen to disagree with Dawkins to a certain degree on a different level because he rejects behaviorism, from what I understand, and I can't quite get my head around that. I've read his books, and I don't particularly identify with his worldview as far as that. But I appreciate all of them and what they're doing by all means. Number 4, why was money invented? Money was invented because of scarcity. They had to have some way to distribute goods and services to people, and they knew how difficult it was to make the goods and services. So basically they had a reward system for those who contributed labor. So if you performed labor, you got money, and therefore you were deserving of getting other things with that money. And of course, since money is an invented game, the manipulation always falls into the power of the banks. So you can't escape the corruption that is generated. Doesn't matter how much legislation you do. The monetary system now is extremely degenerative, and I shouldn't have to go into all that. I think that's been covered repeatedly. But the answer is scarcity. Number 5, does Peter think that at the root of a lot of problems and misunderstandings is a lack, does Peter think that at the root of a lot of problems and misunderstandings is a lack of critical thinking and innocent ignorance? Well, I would have to say yes, by all means. Innocent ignorance, I think, is an interesting point. Even if you look at most people, like the KKK, if you were to talk to somebody from the KKK, and it's a despotic disposition, but if you were to sit down and talk to these guys, you'd probably find that at some point that there's an element of innocence to all of them because they've been taught their belief system. They've been taught to put up the walls that they do of racism and ideological, stubbornness. This has been generated. Critical thinking in that context, when you have someone that's that uninformed, critical thinking just goes in loops until they're more educated. So it's not as much critical thinking as it is critical observation. So until new information is brought and given to people, they really don't have any other tools. You can't think yourself out of a box with no new information. Everything is based on feedback from the environment. Number 6, what kind of education have you received? Years ago, I dropped out of art school because the cost was ridiculous. I'm basically self-taught. I've always been interested in religion and politics and things like this. I reject credentialism. I find that most people that are really aware of a particular topic tend to not be trained in the establishment. And I think Jacques actually is a classic example of that, who dropped out of school at about 14. It's a different way of processing. So I left school mainly because I realized it was basically higher education as a business, and going to school for art at the cost that I did, it was completely irrational, and I finally realized that. Number 7, what should be done, or what communities and efforts are already out there that should be supported to reduce people's tendency to be credulous or gullible? Obviously education, and in our system today, education is completely backwards because society is maintained by ignorance. If you had everyone thinking for themselves to the extent where they constantly take in new information, they're constantly acquisitive in the sense of wanting to know more and more and more, society would undergo such rapid transformation that no government or corporate structure would be able to maintain themselves. So there's a deliberate dumbing down of society, and of course the imposition of belief systems that gets you right at the birth point, right when you're brought into the system. Patriotism, nationalism, religion, classic control mechanisms to maintain the integrity of a particular worldview of the elite. So the elite have to impose value systems down. It's not really the elite. They perpetuate it because that's what they know as well, but it's a different tier of organization. The public, unfortunately, just doesn't have the awareness to understand what gullibility is in the system because they've been so indoctrinated. So that's an ongoing and difficult point. But as far as efforts that are out there, people just need to be educated, and people need to understand the foundational elements of society to the highest degree. And from there, they need a foundation. Unfortunately, most today don't have a solid foundation about life's processes and what's actually relevant. And the near empirical nature of discussing relevance isn't an opinion. There's so many things that we need in society that we have to have, and all of us share this common ground. And until people come to terms with that and we come together on that level, it's not a civilization. Number 8, what do I think of the movement supporting and connecting movements and communities and efforts already out there which promote the direction that this movement would support? Sure. So the question basically is, what about other movements like green movements and things like this that are basically in line? Well, I can't. For example, the communications team I was talking about earlier, I can't stress enough the need to pull in Greenpeace, to pull in other organizations that seek a better world, and get them to detach from the, I would have to say, naivety that they currently have. You never hear Greenpeace really talk about the monetary system, do you? They just talk about corrupt, profit-seeking corporations. That, until they realize the foundational corruption of the monetary system, I see these organizations as patchwork, and I think Jacques would agree as well. We have to get the foundation out there. We have to get people to understand what the monetary system is and what it's created in and of itself, not necessarily the just surface corruption that a lot of these organizations tend to talk about. And until they do that, until these organizations do that, I can only hope. I mean, they do great, but I can only hope that they eventually wake up to this reality. And yes, I would love to get all of them to come into this, because the Venus Project as a whole really is an umbrella for all the other green movements and all the other, pseudo-democratic and political movements that want freedom and liberty for all and an equal abundance for all. I see the Venus Project as an umbrella, so any communication I get from these organizations, I definitely invite, and I try to pull them in as best I can. Unfortunately, they are also businesses, so they tend to have an establishment to support. So even if another more logical group comes along, they tend to recoil because they're still making their money because of their own establishment that they've created. That's another dramatic problem of the monetary system. Number 9, I have always heard you talk about how we only vote for people instead of issues. Do you think the national initiative would be a good transition for the Venus Project? Well, I would have to, unfortunately, say I need to look into what the national initiative is. I don't know what that is, unfortunately. I've been so caught up with things, but I will look into that after this is over. I can assume what it might be. Basically, when it comes to democracy and voting, as I denote in the activist orientation, there really was never a democracy, because in order to have a democracy, a true democracy where everyone participated would be insane in the current lack of education environment, so to speak, because everyone's value systems are so astray at this point in time. And this is a touchy subject, and I'm going to talk about this more so, I think, as other questions move forward, because I believe there's another one similar. But essentially, as far as democracy is concerned, people's contributions are related to how society actually functions. So, in this society, there's no reason for someone to vote for taxes because taxes don't exist. There's no reason for particular legislation for many of the things that we think that we need to have participation in. And unfortunately, if you look at the way society functions now, democracy is a complete illusion, and it always was. In the new system, democracy is basically a contribution to the technical processes of society on multiple levels. I go through this in detail in the activist video. And essentially, you contribute into the system. It's picked up initially by a computerized database that can understand what you're asking. Let me quickly elaborate on that. So let's say, for example, you have an invention, and as I said in the manual, industry and government are the same thing, because there's no reason. Any larger organization has to be is an organization that provides the goods and services for the people and oversees the environment. That's all government is. That's all it would ever need to be. Everything else has been manufactured on top of this simplistic reality. So if someone wants to contribute, they go and they contribute and propose to a system. So if you have something you want to invent, say you have an innovation for the airline industry, so to speak, an airline, a plane. So you would input this new proposal into the system, and the system would be intelligent enough to say, well, you know what? The materials that you're proposing were actually tried in 1975, and we came to realize that it couldn't stand this particular dynamic, so it had to be replaced with a better material. And based on our current calculations, and because the computer system understands the database, understands everything that's out there, it can immediately give you feedback about improvements to your product that you're trying to invent. They'll say you have a design for a wingspan. Well, the system will say, well, based on the general laws of aerodynamics, we would recommend that you did this, this, and this. And if the computer, in its feedback, sees that what you're proposing has merit based on what's currently in existence, which is a logical, technical process, then it's submitted into the system and it moves forward. And this would go in the same type of logic for any type of so-called political idea, even though there's no such thing as politics. Say, for example, you had an idea for a large underwater tunnel that went from one continent to another. Well, the computer system would understand the gravity associated with the water pressure. It would understand what could be built and what couldn't. It would understand problems with the tidal shifts in construction, about how difficult it would be, how long it would take. And maybe it would be rejected by the system because we didn't have, at that point in time, the technological ability to do it. This is the type of initial interaction and feedback that will exist in the future. And to think it's mystical or it's idealistic is untrue. This type of technological feedback already exists, but on a smaller scale. We just want to make the focus to maximize it so our decision makings can be delegated to machines at their initial stages. Our creativity is still in existence, but we are balancing it out with technology that I can understand physically what's relevant and technologically possible. So that is what a true democracy would be. You don't just go and punch a card and vote people in. That's a joke, and it always was. In order for people to contribute to society, they have to understand how society works. So until they're educated enough to understand how technical processes work, they really can't contribute to society because they don't have the basis to do so in this system. It's not about voting for tax cuts, as I've said before, because there's no taxes, there's no money. And when you look back and you realize that the majority of people that things fight about in regards to legislation in democracy, it's all money related. So all of that's gone. So I hope that's relatively clear. That's a very long-winded topic, and if it's not clear, post a note on the forum or the new page I'm going to set up for the radio show, and I can elaborate more on this in time, but I want to try and get through the rest of these questions. Number 10, do you receive death threats? I have received death threats from the religious community in the past. Not very recently, but I still get a lot of aggressive emails that I pretty much all talk, but I'm it's still worth being cautious. Do I have plans to participate on a more personal level with the forum and movement in the future? Obviously, this is what I'm doing right now. Number 12, have you analyzed possibilities to solve the participation in the Venus Project of very extreme religious societies, such as Islam? Yes, that's, of course, a big issue. We have to figure out a way to bridge the differences between peoples, and this is exactly what the communications team will also be a part of. We have to relay to the religious community that while we might have our differences and while we might not agree, we still have the fundamental common ground. We still need air and water and shelter, and we still want amenities of life. We still want the resources available. We still want, everyone requires the same basic needs. And until that's met, there's no point in even worrying about so many other things that people talk about today. So as far as the religious community, my approach is common ground at this point. The way I presented part one of Zeitgeist 1 was very direct and very stern, and while I stand behind all of that in my sense of communication, I do have to retract slightly because I realize that, telling people they're wrong is really not the way to go when it comes to communication. They have to realize for themselves. You can't tell people anything. They have to realize it for themselves through information, and that's an important thing. Islam is now surpassed Christianity. Islam presents some very severe problems to society on a larger scale. I'd say Islam based on the pattern, and not to mention these UN resolutions that are coming out. It's a really scary what they're trying to do. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the new anti-blasphemy resolutions by the UN would basically make my first film illegal to some degree, depending on how the respective country chooses to react. So these are big problems. Everyone should have the right to criticize anything and everything at all times. Islam is a very problematic religion. I'd say it's the most dangerous out of all the religions. Its very doctrines are of the highest form of arrogance. Islam could be the religion of peace. I meet different people that do different things, but I would have to say that if you read through these books, if you read the end of the Quran, it's extremely negative. So it's definitely a barrier, but it's my hope that people will see the common ground and they'll begin to look past the religious disposition. It's very easier said than done, yes, I know. Number 13, in a cybernated world, hackers would be the biggest problem. Did you or Jacques design, excuse me, it's strangely written, have we designed solutions to deal with hackers? Well, yes, redundancy is the solution to everything. In our current system, there's not enough money to create the type of redundancy needed to really make a humane society. For instance, I'm sure many of you heard about that plane that took off from New York, I believe LaGuardia, and hit a flock of birds, and then the plane crashed into the water because they knocked out both of the jets. Well, in an advanced society, you'd have redundancy. You'd have 2 more engines easily. You'd have multiple landing gears. You'd have first of all, everything would probably be computerized. You wouldn't even need a pilot. You'd have 7 different autopilots. If one goes out, you have 6 more levels of redundancy. In this system we have today, redundancy is simply too expensive because everything is made to be bought and sold. In the future, we make things to last and work. Big difference in the approach. So I believe that, say, the 1-mile diameter circular city that Jacques talks about eventually will be able to be powered in its monitoring and in its general monitoring structure, probably by no more than a general server you'd find in an office. The size of it isn't the issue. So at that level, if there's any type of problem, you have immediate redundancy, probably up to 5 or 6 levels. And there's no reason why we couldn't do that. If a hacker comes in, boom, you shift and you move on. I think hackers, for example, unless we're in a transition point, why would someone want to hack the system that feeds them? What's the gain from that? So in the larger transition, the motivation for such things will really not exist because there's nothing to gain. And the horror generated by society at such actions will really degrade anybody that's motivated to do so. And this is one of those conditioning aspects that I think will move forward. But as a quick answer, the answer is redundancy, and that would be throughout everything in all walks of society. Number 14, what is your position about global warming? I see conflicting information on global warming. Obviously, the governments have been using it to their advantage financially. The corporations have these tax credits and things like that. If they cared about global warming, you'd have a fully subsidized electric car on the street right now. They don't care. I really don't know. There is some form of change, but I haven't had a chance to analyze everything to the extent to make a concrete decision. I see nothing but pure conflict between one side and the other. And ultimately, it could be a big issue, but there are many other very, very, very important issues at hand, such as the oceans running out of fish by about 2040, 2050. That's a very real reality that's been documented, along with the losing of topsoil, along with the removing of the bees. There's so many ecological problems to go with, and I'm going to be posting more information on that on the site as we move forward. Number 15, would we implement a global disarmament? Global disarmament wouldn't be legislated. It would be realized that there's no point in having these weapons anymore. The only weapons that society needs are weapons to counteract things that are a threat to all humanity. So if you have a meteor or an asteroid heading towards the planet, yes, you'd have to have something to take that out. You'd have to figure out something. So armament wouldn't be against the people. We have to create a new culture where there's no reason for everyone to be scared of each other. And in a world of scarcity, this has been dominant. Moving out of the world of scarcity, you'll see a tremendous reduction in crime because there's no reason for it. So, no one's going to be forced to give up their guns and all of this. But the idea and reasoning behind it will fade because that's just how logic works and that's how conditioning works. Number 16, how would people refrain from being lazy? I think this goes back to the incentive point. Well, I would first of all say that most people's lives have been stolen from them. You're born into this system. You're thrown into education, which really our educational system is about 200 years old at a minimum, actually much longer than that, but it's based on the industrial era. Education is really terrible in this structure. I don't even know where to begin with how absurd the method of education is. But be that as it may, once you get into higher education, you're in as I said, a cookie-cutter processing plant because your focus is on the job. Suddenly that's your purpose. I'd say most people I meet really don't care for their jobs. They really try hard to believe what they're doing represents them in some way, and they get into it. But I think they're lying to themselves to a large degree, and I really can't say I've met anyone that can say definitively that they just love their job, unless they come from an area that had a lot of money, which put them in the position that they wanted to be in. So my point is basically laziness is a rejection of all the stuff that we're forced to do because we have to in order to survive. I think the reason people sit around and watch television is not only because they've been conditioned to do so, it's because they have a emotional problem with the fact that they're a slave to the system. They're in debt, and I really think it's just a psychological rejection. That's what laziness is. I'm certainly not lazy. I know tons of people that hate their jobs, but they also have all these things that they love to do, and they're not lazy at all. Most people really aren't lazy. If you think of yourself and what you're interested in, you'll find that you're really not lazy as long as you're focused on things that you actually like. Okay. Number 17. Do you believe in peaceful coexistence with other democracies? If the answer is yes, do you think we need to have an army or cybernetic army to protect our cities? Well, peaceful coexistence, we can only hope that, say, when the first city is built, that it would be welcomed. But in the age of false flag terrorism, in the age of obvious CIA that runs errands for its corporate constituents, as John Perkins points out, it would not surprise me in the least if a first city was built and it was blown up and by covert interests of other governments. It happens. It always happens. It's always happened. So to think that it wouldn't happen into something like this in order for an establishment to be preserved, a financial establishment, well, I think it very easily could happen. So I believe that the first city would need to be somewhat protected, probably to a certain degree. I think you would have to have some kind of protection to make sure that these types of things couldn't happen. It's unfortunate in a transition that we'd have to do stuff like that. But I think that's the only logical way to think about it. We have a long way to go as far as moving this culture into a different way of thinking. But I believe that it's the only transition possible. Either the world learns to work together or we're going to destroy ourselves, and that's really the end of it. Soon we're going to have nuclear warheads in space if we don't already. World War III is not going to be it's not going to be survived by that many. And considering how many armaments there are out there and that we always end up using them one way or another, it's very scary to think about the type of wars that could be coming. Not to mention, by the way, the use of technology for the war industry. I was made aware of an article today that basically was talking about the Pentagon making fully autonomous cybernetic machines to kill people, and this is an inevitability. And this is something that we have got to stand up against immediately because this is just the worst use of technology we can think of. This is what gives technology a bad name. So this is another attribute that I will be talking more about in the future is, we have a race against time on multiple levels, both economically, ecologically, and, of course, against the establishment, which can use this technology against us on a large scale. So something to think about. Hopefully I answered that question well enough. Number 18, what about the New York Times 9/11 comment? I was misquoted, and actually, it's funny, when I read that, I didn't even think about that comment. When I was talking to a reporter very briefly, I mentioned that I didn't focus on 9/11 anymore because I've said my piece and I've moved beyond it, or whatever he commented on, and he just stuck it in there, and it made it sort of sound like I was detracting the whole thing, and that's absolutely not the case. I talk about false flag terrorism all the time. Number 19, what are your plans for this movement if the country falls under the role of martial law as a designed outcome from the rioting which would ensue from economic collapse? That's, of course, a very, very important question. Basically, the numbers need to be powerful in this movement to the extent where the standing armies literally can't compare. and this is a dramatic thing to say, but it's very true. I believe there's about 1.1 million Army personnel in America. I can't remember how many police there are, but if you considering how many people are on this planet versus the brainwashed people that work for the establishment, and some of them mean well. I'm not trying to put down the military. These are people that have been conditioned into their value systems, and it's not their fault. Same with the police. But once enough people are able to come forward with a unified direction, there's no way that the establishment can find enough people to walk against it. And this is an important thing, and why numbers are so important, why we need millions and millions of people that are not only involved in a general sense, but also able to be active in an immediate sense. So if there was ever a march on Washington, it wouldn't be just a couple 100,000 people; it would be millions. And this is the kind of thing that we're set to create, not only in America but throughout the world. And that's the whole point. It's, as I denoted in the film, it has to be the largest mass movement the world has ever seen. You have to get people united in a common goal. And once you do that, the elite and the powers that be and the military are so small in numbers that, first of all, they'll feel extremely uncomfortable going against people of such numbers. So this is the only way to combat that. There's no advocation of violence at any point. It's simply the old Martin Luther King notions, and Gandhi notions. The numbers are so vast that the establishment doesn't stand a chance. And that's really the observation that needs to be pointed out. I think it's going to be catalytic if we ever do have rioting and from this economic collapse. People just need to know where to go, and that's where all of this comes in. Unfortunately, no one has any idea where to go. They're listening to all of these other people talk about things that are just basically criminalizing the government and the constituents, and the AIG and all of this nonsense that really has no basis or relevance for people to be mad about. What they should be mad about is the establishment itself. And until we get that awareness out there and for people to focus on what the real change is, moving forward in a common direction for all humanity, as ambitious as that sounds, really that's the only end that we can hope for, and the problems are never going to go away otherwise. So in answer to that question, we need to get to everyone as fast as possible, especially those that are upset. If you meet somebody that's been recently unemployed and they're talking about the banking system loosely and they don't understand what the mechanisms are, please communicate to them what the real central mechanisms are, about how the whole system is a contrivance designed to periodically fail, and it basically works to the benefit of the upper echelon of the corporate and governmental elite. And it's a continuous cycle that's been going on for a long time. We can't handle this cycle anymore. So things like that. I'll try to post more information on that as far as communication and talking to people in the future. Let's see here. Number 22. Do you have any plans for a communication strategy which will deal with people with antisocial affiliation? Actually, I'm sorry. That was one I basically touched before. Yes, okay. Do you believe that the decisions of the technical committee and the computers should be submitted to the approval of the people, or do you believe that they should be forced to accept those decisions even against their will? In other words, do you think that the Venus society must be a technocracy or a direct democracy? Well, the idea of a technocracy never materialized, so I would throw that out. As far as a direct democracy, I addressed that before. There is no such thing as a direct democracy. Unless you're satisfied with what we have now, it's never going to get any better, and I don't consider what we have now a democracy whatsoever. As far as the technical decisions of the committee and the computers submitted to the approval of the people, well, the people are the ones that are submitting the points, and when we understand that life is understand the foundation of society is a technical process, if someone comes up with a better way to, say, create clean water and filtrate water, who's going to want to vote against something like that? If someone comes up with a better way for food production, who's going to want to vote against something like that? If someone designs this great automotive or transportation form of equipment, why would someone want to regress into something else that isn't as optimized as can be? The whole point of this is to optimize all of our resources and the general outlay of the environment and the government to the extent where, again, all that's relevant is the goods and services and the maintenance of the environment. That's all there is. So there's really very little subjectivity in this. If you want something, then you submit it, and it will be put into functionality as long as there are the resources to do it. And hopefully through time, it will get to a point where people can have custom things very easily through molds and all these advanced technologies that Jacques has talked about. Someone wants something very unique, well, they could design it, and it could be created for them without the need for a factory that has to produce multiples or machines that have to be designed just to make something. There could be a certain degree of flexibility that will eventually emerge where you'll have so much more freedom of what you want because the restrictions of mass production and profit don't exist. So things like that. So would it be submitted, everything be submitted for the approval of the people? Yes and no. The subjectivity isn't there in the system. And that's a very difficult thing, unfortunately, to talk about to people because they don't understand that there's such a thing as an optimization of everything. And there really is, and there's a train of thought that goes through the whole thing. And based on our current government now and all the nonsense and noise in the system, I can completely see how people have a difficult time with this. So it's not a democracy in the sense of what people traditionally consider. And I have a feeling I'm going to have to talk about that a lot more because of the confusions that brings up. Are you aware of the affiliation with Artivists.org and Petrobras, the oil company from Brazil? Yes, I am, of course. They were one of the sponsors for, I think, both times I had my films in there. And, what am I supposed to do about that? Artivist is funded by sponsorship. Do I like type of fuel that Petrobras is advocating? No, and that's why I completely I don't derail, but I move against biomass specifically in the film because it's not the most efficient. We have plenty of other energy resources besides oil and biomass to serve our needs. So, but anyway, I have no affiliation with Petrobras, and I'm certainly not going to tell Artivists what to do. I was just happy that they were going to show the film at all. So, number 27, the activist orientation wasn't oriented towards activism very much. Can we expect to see more concrete plans and instructions for actions in the future? Absolutely. One context I'm going to have for this on the projects page is what I'm going to call hi-fi and lo-fi activism. Hi-fi activism is the activism that we're talking about in the most advanced forms of the Venus Project, where technology is used for the betterment of society to its highest degree, where money is eliminated, where we don't have to worry about all of the problems that are generated by the need to compete and create scarcity. The lo-fi would have to do with things that we need to do now. We have tremendous ecological problems, so we have to begin to collar proactively what's happening. I want to refrain from extreme patchwork. I get a lot of people that email me with whole new social designs that are based on the monetary system, and to me that's patchwork. If we're going to make any form of transition, it needs to be out of this system entirely. However, that doesn't mean we are just going to ignore the problems of society right now. People do need to speak out against, the nonsensical resolutions of the UN. They do need to speak out about, draconian legislation. They do need to speak out about everything that is a problem, and that's another form of this. But we have to always present the larger picture. We can't have, this idea that the basic idea right now with most patriots and most activists is that they attempt to return to something that never existed. They think that there's some place, some ideal of America that apparently existed, and it never really did. And you have all these guys talking about this in the sense that if we can only get rid of this and that and return back to something, and it's not forward-thinking, it's not progressive, and that's really what our biggest advocation is. But we are losing topsoil. The bees are a problem. We have to discuss the environment. We have to get people proactive, and that's why I'd like to pull in more regional activist-oriented groups, more regionally oriented groups, more conceptually regional-oriented groups, if that makes any sense, such as Greenpeace and things like that. So, yes, I'm working on that, and I apologize I haven't had more to do with that. I really just want to get the overview out there for public consumption, and that's what I've been trying to do with all of this material thus far. Number 28, do you feel economic collapse is something which will inevitably happen, and if so, how soon? Yes, economic collapse will come fundamentally in the form of technological unemployment. And I find it interesting that no one talks about this to this day. Technological unemployment is the nail in the coffin. It's not going to go away. Even if there's extreme financial limitation, you're always going to have scientists persevering with new technology. And the question is it going to be used for the betterment of society, or is it going to go to the Pentagon? And this is a very important point. regardless of that, the breakdown of society, of course, with the depression that we have now, with the extreme rising unemployment, with the constant job losses, is only going to be compounded by the technological unemployment of machines replacing human labor. It's a collision course with technological unemployment, and it's one way or another we have to move out of the system. It's either we move out of the system or they deliberately withhold technology just to keep people employed, which is probably the most ludicrous and irresponsible disposition that we could have. You don't give someone a handheld, screwdriver when they have options to use an electric screwdriver just because you want them to work more hours. It's insanity. Technology will free people eventually. Either they'll be completely, in other words, technology will create more free time for people one way or another, and that'll come either in two forms. Either they'll be on welfare and have no jobs, or they will be free in a new society that has used technology to the highest advantage to free humans of repetitive human labor, to create a new system where the technology is really the Emancipation Proclamation. Our slaves are the technological machines, and humans do not have to be concerned with these issues anymore. The focus of society is to create the technology to relieve us of problems, whether industrial or management-oriented, such as government and things like that. So to answer your question more definitively, the economic collapse is going to happen one way or another through technological unemployment, and that's that. It doesn't matter what they do with the banking system. There's nothing that's going to stop this. People are not going to have the jobs, therefore they're not going to have the purchasing power to buy things and support the industries that initially replaced them with the machines to begin with. Number 29. I have some concerns regarding what was mentioned in the orientation film. I think making a lot of things automated is a good idea, but what about occupations that people enjoy, like doctors and auto mechanics and farmers? Do you think that they'll just give up their passion and let robots take over? I see a move towards dehumanization in the Venus Project, especially in decision-making. Well, first of all, dehumanization, I can't see how that word is relevant. What we're doing is using tools that we've created to free us and make our lives easier and improve our performance. No different than a calculator or a set of eyeglasses. If wearing a pair of eyeglasses is dehumanizing, I don't think that makes any sense. Machines are extensions of us. If people want to be doctors, first of all, there's always going to be innovations that we're going to come up with initially. The machines don't magically come up with things. We interact with the machines to get the best possible feedback. So if you, let me say like an auto mechanic. The auto mechanic isn't just going to be an auto mechanic that takes out springs. The auto mechanic could be someone who engineers new automobiles. It would be a new level of activity for human thought and creativity. If people want to, say, be a chef, for instance, if you want to cook, well, that's great. Then do it. You'll have a kitchen to do it. If you don't want to cook, then you can have automated systems make food very easily in a highly advanced way. These are things that people will do what they want to do, and they won't charge money for it. So say you want to open a restaurant, you love cooking, especially the transition. There are people I know that appreciate this. Well, first of all, you'll have what you need. You don't charge money to do it. You do it because you want to do it. And that's really the question. If you want to do it, then the conditions can be made for that to be done. As long as it's not, retroactive to society, obviously. And there'd be no grounds for that as time moves forward. Let's see here. Yeah, and the same thing goes for doctors. Doctors would not just perform surgery. They would be constantly researching. Basically, the role of humans are in the process of research. We are constantly researching and seeking new innovations. That's really the next level. And then we have the machines take over once we come up with new ideas and decisions, or decisions that are arrived at. There's a lot of tangents I could go off on that, but I'm not going to at this point. Number 30, this issue of no property sounds like communism. People like to own things. It has nothing to do with scarcity. People like to personalize their vehicles. I don't know. I'm not a fan of letting other people drive my car. I see exactly where this guy is coming from, or he or she is coming from. First of all, no property does sound like communism. That was one of the tenets of communism. Unfortunately, communism existed in scarcity. It maintained all the attributes of the normal economic system, basically, apart from certain general, broad attributes. But because it existed not in a vacuum and had the pressures from the external world, there was no way communism even had a chance from the very onslaught. Communism was designed to free the proletariat and the labor class, and basically they didn't do that at all. It did not work because they didn't address the source of the problem, which was resource management and the need to create an abundance. The idea of property itself comes from a primitive worldview of protection needed in order to protect yourself, in order to protect your belongings so they don't get taken because of the scarcity in the environment. Property is not something that people appreciate. They don't really know what they're talking about if they say they like their property. What they like is the idea of these things being theirs, and that's that. And there's no reason why that idea can't exist in the future, but on a much more balanced level where people have access to everything, so therefore the idea of property has no basis because everyone can get something, and then it becomes more strategic because things produced don't have the multiplicity, so everything is shared to the extent where resources aren't wasted. Property is a very big problem psychologically for people right now, and I completely can relate to that because people want to protect what they have, but that's really it. It's an outgrowth of scarcity. It's not that you're restricted from having things. That's not it at all. It's the fact that everything is made available, and it can be done. It's not that everyone owns one of everything. It's that everybody shares everything. There's no reason to have a whole parking lot full of cars. There's no reason for a lot of the wasteful things that we do in order to keep this economic system going. I can't stress the fact that property is an outgrowth of scarcity. It is not something that, in this system in transition, people would say, oh, I like my things. Well, that's because they don't know anything else beyond that. They don't even know the luxury of not having to deal with a lot of the stuff that we deal with. When we move, it's a nightmare. I've reduced what I own substantially. I can't stand property. Christmas, I refuse gifts. I don't want any more stuff. It's just pointless to me to have all this stuff that people hoard and keep in their basements, and it's just a waste. It's unbelievable. That's something else that is due for a larger point, because the multiplicity of industry, because of the imposed conditioning that people have been given to want property as a form of identity, is extremely dangerous and poses so many problems on so many levels I don't even know where to begin. Number 31. They're quoting a comment I made on the forum regarding how I don't want to hear about, I'm not interested in ideas about the Illuminati, the New World Order, aliens, 2012, and the like. And they go on to say that this is turning into a clubhouse of banned topics and specific thinking, and it's not about truth, and to ignore certain aspects of the conspiracy that don't fit within my worldview makes me no different than Alex Jones. So I have to ask, is this movement about truth, or are you implementing the New World Order? Well, first of all, the reason I point out those points is because they don't do anything. They don't do anything. It does nothing to sit there and tell somebody that there's some ruling elite of secret society Satanists that want to dominate the world and assassinate a great majority of the world population. Even if that was true, which it isn't, even if that was true, it does absolutely nothing. What are people going to do? They're just going to run around with their head cut off looking for invisible enemies. The reason I don't talk about metaphysical or conspiratorial things on that level is because I want to focus on what will actually create positive change. If you show people the light as opposed to the dark doesn't even matter anymore because they'll have a direction they can march through to. And that's really the most important point. The greatest form of activism isn't the constant exposure of corporate and governmental fraud and, all of the things that have been going on since the dawn of civilization in this scarcity-driven world that we live in. We're really barely out of the jungle on this planet. The real activism comes from giving the solution, having people identify with that solution, and then moving forward with that solution. And when that becomes powerful enough, all of the little secret society groups and all of the so-called elite, they'll be trampled because they have nothing. It's such a small vicinity of people that think in the truly despotic ways. All they have is the military and the police, and that's something that we'll eventually have to get to next. We have to have a complete awakening in the military and the police because basically this is it. They're the ones that have been conditioned to move against the people, and if we can get to them, it's over. The establishment's over. So that's another thing for a larger topic. As far as the other points, no, the reason I don't talk about aliens in 2012 is because there's no point in it. There's full of, prophecy and things like this. Unless you can prove to me aliens have some relevance to the one person dying every second from starvation, I don't want to hear about it. I don't care. if there are aliens, well, have them land. It'll be great to meet them. It's not of interest to me. 2012 prophecy, 2012 is a religious notion. I couldn't care less about that either. Go ahead and talk about it. We have a miscellaneous section now. If you want to talk about it, if you feel it's relevant, then work it out. Get feedback from your fellow man. That's great. But that's just not relevant. And as far as the rest of that question, I think I covered most of that. Number 32. I need to start a Peoria chapter of the Zeitgeist movement. How do I? Where do I begin? Who do I talk to, etc. This is something I'm going to talk about in a new page I'm putting up about third-party sites and groups, and I'm going to try and get that up soon. And it's going to have general points in regards to what people can do in an activist sense. We do need chapters. It needs to get more unified. I know a friend of mine in Los Angeles has a chapter meeting once a week. I have thought about New York chapters that I could be involved in, but we really have to get a lot done before we can have everyone focused in a specific way, before those chapters are really effective, and we haven't quite gotten there. So I'm going to address that soon. But basically, if you build a website and send it to us, and you're active and keeping it there, and you're updating it, I mean, there's only so much we can do. I can't, for example, answer emails right now in Arabic. I can't do it. I don't have the people to do it. Eventually, I'm hoping to get people that speak bilingually in each language, and we can start to really address this on a global scale. It's just very difficult right now because of the lack of resources that we have. Next question. There's a lot of controversy over the Siemens logo at the end of Zeitgeist Addendum. That is supposed to be more blurred than it is. The reason I kind of kept it in there to begin with is because I wanted people to know it was Times Square, and that's a very predominant banner, or whatever you would call it, billboard in Times Square. So I kept it in there for that. But I guess looking back on it now, I guess I should have blurred it out a little bit more. Number 34, Peter, what is your take on the straw man conception? You know what? I'm sorry about that. I haven't had a chance to look into what that was, so I'm going to circle that right now and check that out. So I'm going to have to move past that right now. Number 35, what about guns? There may be people interested in the Venus Project who still want to keep their guns. Is this something that will be allowed? What about hunters? Some people are very passionate about that, so I think guns would have to remain in the picture. Well, I think guns overall, legislation against guns is not going to help anything. They just go underground, just like anything that has legislation against it. So my hope is that eventually people would begin to shift their worldviews away from anything denoting the use of guns, and even hunting. That's a very primitive thing that we're doing. They might enjoy it now, but if you look at how vain and horrifying it is, unless you're hunting for food, which really isn't necessary in the system, you know, that's one of those transitional points that will need to be dealt with. As far as general gun usage, you know, if people aren't threatened, they don't have a need to want to protect themselves. Everyone has a reason for what they do, and you know that's just the reality of it. Would guns be outlawed? Absolutely not. There's no laws against anything. At least in the transition, obviously there would have to be something like that. But in the highest state, people would have an integrity of the system. And if there is a problem, then people come together and they figure out a solution immediately. You don't just call the police. It's a different way of looking at each other in the world. Let's see, number 36. Did you approach Jacques or did he approach you? I saw a film called Future by Design by William Gizecki, and I was intrigued. And then I sent an email to William thanking him for making the film, and then he forwarded it to Roxanne, and Roxanne emailed me, and then they invited me to visit, and I went and visited, and I was blown away by his perspective, and that's basically how that happened. Number 37, did the Holocaust really occur, or was it a lie for Zionists to get Israel? I've been to Auschwitz. The Holocaust obviously occurred. I've seen the videos that came out after that. There's a lot of strange conspiracy notions and all of that. What I will say is that the Holocaust has been used as an excuse for the Jewish government of Israel. I say Jewish in the sense of the nationalist origin, not religious or race origin. So just because I say these things doesn't mean I'm anti-Semitic. They've been hiding behind that forever, the Zionist culture in Israel, and they use it to their advantage. And they basically used it to get Israel itself. That's a geopolitical strategy and support from the United States. But all of those conspiracy theories, I don't care for that. Obviously, it happened. And like any event in history, it's used whatever political, geopolitical advantage can be come up with. So that's for other people to look into. What can the young people who do not have land or money do to start ideas such as self-sufficient housing? So the question is, if people don't have money, what can they do to create more self-sufficient means? There's a lot of things that people can do on their own accord to reduce the complexity of their life and to be more considerate of their environment. I have a great book, I don't have the name of it in front of me, and it goes through all of the different solar panels and everything that people have used. And for example, there was a simple person out in the Midwest who had a trailer, and they hooked up to a windmill and a solar panel, and they were completely off the grid. Granted, not everyone would want to live in a restricted environment like that, but it depends how dedicated you really are. I live in New York. I'm limited as far as my options living in an apartment. I think that we can't, even though I advocate this kind of lo-fi form of activism of becoming off the grid. If I lived down in the middle of nowhere, by all means, I would be off the grid. I don't like driving. That's one of the reasons I like living in the metropolitan areas. I don't like driving. I can't stand cars and the exhaust and everything. So I feel there are plenty of things that can be done by anyone as far as what you purchase, general activism. Don't buy anything from a sweatshop. But these are things that, unfortunately, don't have that much of a relevance to the larger problem at hand. If everyone got off the grid and they were able to do it, that would be powerful. But having just a few people do it doesn't create as much of a statement as need be. If you live in the Midwest and you don't have any money, well, you do what you can based on the budget that you have. This is the problem with the monetary system, is it's self-perpetuating because of everyone's constant need to save money. For example, I got an email from somebody that commented on Walmart, and they said, we have to teach people not to shop at Walmart, and then Walmart will stop its slavery practices and all of its horrible things it does in outsourcing and things like this, and all of its wasteful practices. Well, that's all well and good, but there are plenty of people out there that really can't afford to buy from other places besides Walmart. And given their circumstance, as severe as some of them are, especially now, they don't have the option, they don't have the luxury of picking and choosing. And this is another one of those attributes of the system that's very problematic. And it's something that should be thought about. So when I meet people that can't afford, say, to be ethical, so to speak, which is a common disposition, I understand where they're coming from. So all I can say is do what you can. Recycle, do everything that you normally would do. If you live out in the middle of the Midwest, try to get off the grid as best you can. Reject all of the established orders as much as possible. Try not to shop at places like Walmart or any place that uses sweatshop slavery. And, we do the best we can. In this system, it's tough. I know. Number 40, if the education system we are taught, let me rephrase this, in the educational system, we are taught that all the same thing instead of individualized teaching will be it happens. Sorry, I don't quite understand this question. I'm going to have to skip that question. I don't quite understand it. Number 41, as a point of discussion in the spirit of being happy with being proven wrong, I quite welcome you extending the absolute power corrupts absolutely quote into absolute power corrupts absolutely only in a system where corruption is rewarded. Yes, I would have to say that's a great comment. I think I said that at one point. Power has to have a reason. Power has to have a reward. The whole definition of power is control over something, and the only reason anybody would want that type of responsibility is if they have something to gain from it. So absolute power, that old notion, it's actually in Zeitgeist 1. In the context of the monetary system, it's absolutely correct, as I'm describing the banking system. World government by the banking elite, which is basically slowly being set up as this breakdown occurs. It's one of the positive attributes for the banking system itself is this larger restructuring, will be absolutely horrifying because all the mechanisms will still be in place, except you'll have a total control over the distribution of money, which basically controls everyone's lives. And there's a big difference between that and a resource-based economy, huge difference. So, giving a team of an interdisciplinary set of teams the power to orient the society is very, very different from a group of elite that make money off of the corporations that perpetuate the system through the economic structure. Very big difference. So I hope that's expansive enough. I would have change that and say absolute power corrupts in a monetary system because the entire basis is differential advantage. Number 42, is the method of implementing the Venus Project to start to build a city in Florida first as a guinea pig, or trying to spread the Zeitgeist ideas to the whole world and go for the whole globe to mobilize it? Obviously, we have to start somewhere. In order for the system to really work, it's going to have to be a global system because that's the highest optimization of the planet's resources. But that's way down the line. That's a very difficult barrier to overcome. If the first city can be built, it could be used as a testing ground. It could be used as a research center, a very large one. And if it could happen, it would be used to show other people what's possible. You'd bring in world leaders, and you'd say, you guys are suffering from the same cycles over and over again. And hopefully we'd find leaders that eventually can move out of this idea because out of the primitiveness of their current position. Because I think once anyone realizes the merit of this, they should really eventually come to our side. I can't see logically, unless people are being extremely irrational based on dogmatic dispositions and traditionalized notions, how anybody can move against this concept. I could easily debate anybody when it comes to technical processes or discuss anybody. I don't like debate. I like to try and discuss with people, but unfortunately the climate is such everyone likes to get one up on each other. The logic of this institution is without parallel, and the movement is going to have to happen one way or another into the world working together. Otherwise, the wars will just continue and such. So anyway, to answer the question, it's basically going to have to be both. We have to start somewhere, and the first step is really education, which is why Jacques and Roxanne have advocated a new film beyond my budget. I'm trying to get some larger people to do this, to show what lifestyle will be in this system, to get people to say, wow, that would be great, let's do that, things like that. Number 43, are you a Manly P. Hall fan? Not particularly. I got some information sourced to him for the first section of Zeitgeist 1, and I believe in regard to astrotheology, but beyond that, I have no association with him. I know he's one of those guys that are the kind of right-wing conspiracy nationalist religious cultures throw in the group of Freemasons and stuff like that. And I've noticed that they try to associate the movement in my work with some of these more esoteric individuals just simply because I have a source to them, as though just because I have a source to them I support their ideology entirely. That's obviously nonsense. Number 44, Peter, are you or Jacques aware of the risks that may have a high level, let me rephrase this, it's written oddly. Are you aware of the risks of artificial intelligence, specifically a level where machines make complex associations, more complex associations than us? Some say that machines will wake up or discover things we can't assimilate and dominate us with that knowledge. In the New York presentation, I had a little montage of Hollywood films that denote this very idea, and it's a fantasy. Of course, the computers will have a higher associative capacity. That's what their role is. It's our decision to decide what machines do. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the Pentagon is working on autonomous robots that can make decisions, see enemies, and kill on will automatically. This is an example of technology used for the worst. It's up to us to decide what the technology does. And if we program it to have such processes, well, that's a big problem. There's no reason to assume that the inherent nature of intellectual reasoning and logical deduction and artificial intelligence would naturally gravitate to some type of domination. That's our own superstitious projection. That's our absurdity and fantasy. Number 45, what do I think of the TED Talks, and should Fresco try to attend? Absolutely. The TED Talks are really good. I always kind of appreciated the people they had on those. And there was an email campaign actually to get Jacques on TED, and TED responded, and they were very booked up until I think 2 years or something. So that's something we'll keep on the back burner, and I'll definitely have a note on that when we get into more of the communications aspects, where I talk about people trying to get Jacques back on Larry King or any type of major show. And if TED would be a great one as well. 46, are you familiar with the wildcat banking that occurred when Andrew Jackson was president? Yes, of course. The banking power isn't going to change. Whether they're centralized in the form of a central government or they're distributed regionally, the collusion and the tendency for collusion and under oligopoly and under surface monopoly, just like Morgan and the things that they did as denoted in part 1 of Zeitgeist, These things are not going to stop. So there's always going to be problems. I think what Andrew Jackson did was tremendous and great. Did problems arise? Sure. But the poetry, what his statement was profound. Just because we say nationalize the Federal Reserve, that's not going to solve our problems. All that does is create a different mask. I mean, it's the same people that are oscillating between the Fed and the government. It's not this whole illusion the Fed controls the United States. It's not. It's a collusion. If it wasn't, they would have eradicated the Fed in 2 seconds because they have the power to do that. Congress can easily shut down the Fed in one stroke of a pen. Let's see. Number 48, do you think you will be back on the Alex Jones show? Only after a full retraction of all the nonsense that he stated about my work in the interview I had, not to mention the days following, where he and Jason Burmis, like Beavis and Butthead, they sat there and just derailed everything. And I just couldn't believe the propaganda that came out of their mouths without any information whatsoever. They tried to. Alex actually said that the Venus Project was related to the Venus stars, a satanic Luciferian cult. If I see a point-by-point retraction and apology from the Jones camp, sure, I'll go back on a show. Whose idea was the interdisciplinary team? That's, of course, Jacques' idea. He had been talking about that, and I think that's a tremendous point. That's really what all government should ever be, interdisciplinary teams, ever rotating, working with computers for the highest optimization of resource management and industrial production. Would you mind stressing to Zeitgeist movement supporters of the importance of organizing collectives as opposed to just relying on you for direction and action? Well, absolutely. The problem is a great majority of people that are very excited about this don't seem to have a full grasp of what all the tenets are. I get the emails. Everyone seems very excited, and it's great. But there's a lot more clarifying that needs to occur. People really need to go through the activist manual and understand it thoroughly. They need to understand the nature of the economic system and to be able to talk about it very proactively to the extent that I do. I believe that we need to have regional people working independently. This is the nature of it. I don't want a centralized construct, but the information has to get out there some way. We shouldn't have other groups asking for money and things like that at this point. That's very problematic because people who are new to the movement will get confused, and I can't keep track of everything. So when I talk about third-party links and sites and things like that, I'll address that more specifically. But absolutely, we need to organize collectives everywhere, and that's contingent upon how informed the people that initiate those collectives really are, because we could get some splinter groups that really go in a completely different random direction, and it's already happened, actually. Okay, number 51, do you have any plans on the idea of constructing self-sustaining, environmentally friendly communities of resource-based economies? Oh, yes, of course. As denoted a few times, the circular city, I think, is a great initial starting point. Even if it was small, we found a plot of land, and we create the network, we create everything, we create forms of the industry, completely self-sustaining, even on that simplistic level, just to show a completely self-sustaining environment where everything is monitored from a central computer. We regulate all agriculture. It's all done automatic to show the possibilities. Granted, in a monetary system, this could be very expensive, but we'll come to that road when we get there. But by all means, I mean, we definitely have to begin self-sustaining cities one way or another. I mean, the pattern is clear. The Industrial Revolution was only 200 years ago, and we have done an extreme number on our health, from our water supply to the food supplies to the degradation of the topsoil to all number of facets. Ecological crisis beyond anything. It's funny that no one in the mainstream talks about this stuff. I'm going to address that more specifically as the time moves forward. So, number 52. Can you comment on the many self-sustaining, green, environmentally friendly methods of building, such as earthships? Yeah, there's a lot of great creative things happening. Earthships, someone mentioned that, I believe, on in the New York event, and there's so many great ideas out there that if given the initiative, and that's why, for example, in the technology section that I commented earlier on projects, this sort of engineering section, one of the points we can have is not only thinking creatively about new innovations, but how to deal with the problems we have now. So earthships, I believe they used old tires. That's tremendous. If we put our minds to it, as I denote in the manual, we can overcome any problem. It's just simply a matter of time and ingenuity. Once we get rid of the monetary system, then there's no stopping it, because in this system, you have to have money in order to resolve any type of problem. You won't have resolution to any type of problem or conflict unless money can be made from it. So, and that's a tremendous drag on our progress. So absolutely, anybody that has ideas like that, we're going to start a whole section for stuff like that, because it's so proactive and so creative. I mean, the whole thing really comes down to our creativity. Number 53. What sorts of things can we do to actively reject such things in terms of money, as it is what we are trying to move away from? Okay, as it is what we're trying to move away from. Do you think that there should be several days or even a countdown to a day in which we completely reject the use of money? That's a great poetic notion. I appreciate that idea for sure. I would have to say that poetry would be the fundamental element there. I find it difficult because of people's general need to survive, that we get too many people to take on that. But you know what? I think in times such as maybe the next Zeitgeist Day, which, by the way, I'm going to try and do a much larger event that's all day, where it's not only a presentation of such. There'll be conferences, and it will maybe have a multi-tiered building where different attributes can occur. The 4-hour-long New York Zeitgeist Day really wasn't long enough, and I was really astounded at the interest, and it's too bad we couldn't let it go for 6 hours, because there were so many people with questions and great questions. So absolutely, maybe we can have something like that next Zeitgeist Day, where we openly reject the use of money, and maybe even sooner than that. That's a great poetic notion. I'll make a note on that. I like artistic things like that. And last question I have here: do you believe in a higher energy, even if you don't like religions? Are you actually supporting other groups or movements like Greenpeace or something? So that's basically two questions. Do I believe in a higher energy? I guess I'd have to say I don't know what that means. It's sort of a metaphysical question. Is there a larger order? Well, of course there is. We're only a part of something larger, but there's nothing metaphysical about that. There's really no such thing as metaphysical. Everything is physical one way or another. Even if something like ESP was real, it's still physical. There's still a physical annotation to it. So anything like that, it's weird how people sort of meld those together, and they think that there's something beyond. Well, if there is something beyond, then it's still here. It just is only temporarily beyond, if that makes any sense. So, higher energy or anything like that, no, I don't see any evidence of anything other than this larger whole, this oneness that seems to stretch to infinity, at least based on general scientific reference now. Everything is completely interconnected, and the larger order would be sort of the collective consciousness of people coupled with the environment. And if people begin to think collectively in one direction, then there's really no stopping the progress of society. So I would kind of orient it like that. And I think I answered the other question, do I support other groups and movements like Greenpeace? Yes, of course. And I'd love to pull these people in and get them oriented on the extreme problems of the monetary system, get them to understand what they're doing is great, but they're not going the full length. And that's something that all of you can start talking about. I'm making a note now, actually, to discuss issues like that. We're going to have a whole roster of these green movements and activist organizations that advocate, what we're looking for, but they don't go far enough. They don't realize that the monetary system is the fundamental problem. They don't realize that there's no way they're going to obtain, ethics in corporations, because corporations are simply not rewarded for ethics. So that's a dramatic realization that all of those groups need to come to terms with. And that's it for the general questions right now. I don't think I missed any. I think there's some more that I couldn't get in time, but we're going to set up a forum just for questions. I'm going to have Tank Top, who's been doing a tremendous job. And by the way, I want to thank all of you, all the moderators and the administrators that have been helping with this, and because it's really going well, and I really appreciate everybody's work on this. It's really, really fantastic to see so much interest. And when we get larger projects going, don't worry, we're going to have much more going on. It's just finding the best way to organize it from the ground up, and that's the most difficult thing. Something like this that we're doing is really has never been done before, and I think it's important people not fall back on the idea that it's too impractical or it's idealistic. We have to begin to see that this is really the direction. This is the means. And as I believe, the means is the end. So we begin orienting everybody in the specific train of thought, and everybody will fall in line eventually, because as far as I'm concerned, there's really no other option. Hopefully it won't take 50% unemployment to turn people around. Hopefully we won't get to the point where we're suffering such dramatic ecological problems where people are going to have to pay $10 for a bottle of water because of the scarcity. Hopefully we won't get to that point. But if we do get to that point, our fundamental disposition has to be to communicate what the positive goal is, and that's what we should be doing. I can't stress that enough. Stop worrying about all of these issues, these minor things, Obama, and all of these problems, all the ridiculous legislation he put into his stimulus package. There's so many problems that we do have to deal with, but don't get too caught up in that. Let's inform the people of what's possible moving forward and get their head around this particular concept. If we can just do that with a few million people, then we're way ahead of the game, because once they see the light, they have somewhere to go, and I can't stress that enough. That's why I don't talk about conspiracy elements anymore, because all it does is scare people, and I'm not interested in scaring people anymore. I didn't intend to scare people to begin with, but people do need a sense of understanding what the possibilities are, both negative and positive. But if you stress the positive, it gives people that much more motivation to move forward. So I really appreciate a lot of the other people out there that are activist oriented, but when it comes to hate mongering and war mentalities out there, people have radio shows and stuff like this, please take caution when you whatever they say. And always remember, by the way, too, all of the activist groups out there still have their establishment to preserve. They all take massive donations. They all have all of these things that make them very immobile, very immutable. They can't change because they have all these people supporting their organization. Global warming is a great example. You have all of these scientists and these huge sects of research facilities that are dedicated to this, employing so many people with so much money. It gets to a point where they want to believe in global warming because it's supporting an entire sub-industry. And that's another dramatic danger that people fall into. So if you have somebody that's eventually wrong, but they have a massive industry, so they still promote the wrong ideas, because they're making money and supporting themselves, they can't rationalize themselves out of their predicament, so they continue to perpetuate the same falsity. And that's another, self-perpetuation of this system is another important attribute. And I hope that was clear. I apologize, I'm a bit tired today. I hope to be more thorough in the future. I have about 2 minutes left, and basically I'm going to have these attributes of the projects thing is the big thing I wanted to announce. If I didn't answer any of your questions, please, I'm going to get tanked up to make a new forum section just for the radio show, and yeah, we'll do that. I didn't advertise this show either, but the next one, which I believe will be Sunday, I'm trying for Sunday, or excuse me, not this Sunday, but next Sunday, and then we'll do it every other Sunday, and if we get more interest, we'll do it once a week, depending on how much feedback I get. So I think that's about it, and I really appreciate all of you listening, and I just got my 90-second cue to shut this down, so I'm going to play my exit music, and I'll talk to you guys all very soon, and thank you all very much.